It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. Groceries, laundry, maybe a rerun of Law and Order while I folded socks. Instead, I ended up with 2 police officers on my driveway and a neighbor screaming that I had stolen her hummus. Let me back up. That morning, I went to the store like I always do on Sundays. Nothing fancy, just the usual haul of milk, eggs, produce, and a few frozen meals I pretend are healthy. The kind of errands you do on autopilot. I pulled into the garage, popped the trunk, and started unloading the bags into the kitchen. I had just finished the first trip when I noticed Karen. She was standing at the edge of her front walk, sunglasses on, arms crossed, talking loudly into her phone. Karen lives 4 townhomes down from mine and has been a self-permitted HOA guardian for as long as I've lived here. She leaves notes. She stares from behind her blinds. She once called animal control on a garden statue because she thought it was a raccoon. I didn't pay her much attention at first. Maybe she was on hold with her internet provider again. But on my second trip out, I heard her more clearly. "He's back. He has the bags. Yeah, he's taking them inside. I think they're mine. He just walked off with them." At first I thought she was talking about someone else. I looked around. The street was empty except for me and my groceries. And then she looked directly at me and said into the phone, "I'm watching him right now. Hurry." I blinked. Did she think I stole someone's groceries? She didn't answer me when I asked, just turned her back like she hadn't spoken at all. I carried the next 2 bags inside. They weren't even expensive items. Almond milk, cereal, frozen peas. But the way she was acting, you'd think I had taken the crown jewels. And then I heard sirens. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Lights on. Officers stepping out with that careful posture that says they're ready for anything. One of them called out to me, "Sir, please step away from the vehicle." I was holding a bag of apples. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked. "Step away from the bag, sir." I put the apples down slowly. It felt surreal, like I was in one of those hidden camera shows from the early 2000s, but there were no camera crews, just Karen standing on her porch now, pointing toward me like she had just caught a bank robber. "That's him," she said. "He took my groceries. I saw him with the bags. He's been sneaking around all morning. I think he used one of those remote car unlockers." "You think I broke into a car to steal groceries and then carried them into my own home?" "He was moving quickly," she insisted, suspicious. The shorter officer turned to me and asked if I had proof of purchase. I told him yes, I had the receipt inside and could show them my ID, the store app, even my security camera footage. He asked politely if he could follow me in to confirm. I said, "Of course." We went inside. I pulled out the receipt. Time-stamped, bag count matched, store name clearly printed. I opened the grocery store app and showed the digital confirmation. Then I pulled up my doorbell camera footage on my phone. There I was, arriving home with the bags, going back and forth like any other day. The officer nodded and thanked me. The taller one outside was still talking with Karen, who looked like someone had just told her the earth was round, and she refused to believe it. When they brought her over to see the footage, she stared at the screen like she could will it to change. "That receipt could be fake," she said. "He could have printed it, or stolen it from someone else's trash." She pointed at a container of hummus. "The brand is mine. I know my brand." The officer looked at her, looked at me, then said flatly, "Ma'am, there's no evidence any of this belongs to you." Karen started getting louder. Said I had been suspicious for months, that I didn't wave when I passed by, that I sometimes wore a hoodie, that I didn't bring in my trash bins fast enough. She brought up unrelated things. Once, she claimed, I had walked too close to her mailbox. "Ma'am," the officer said, "none of that justifies calling the police for grocery theft." Karen crossed her arms. I want to file a formal complaint. I want him investigated. People like him don't belong in neighborhoods like this." That was the moment I stopped being surprised and started being angry. Because this wasn't about groceries. It wasn't about suspicion. It was about her deciding who belonged and who didn't. Now she had involved the police in her fantasy. The taller officer looked exhausted. "Sir, we're sorry for the inconvenience," he told me. "You're free to go. We'll speak to her separately." Karen was still fuming. That same day, after the cops left without arresting anyone, I went back inside and stared at the bags on the counter. Bananas, lentils, oat milk, harmless food. But now they felt like evidence in a case I hadn't signed up for. And the craziest part? Karen wasn't done. Next up, the HOA gets involved, and Karen tries to turn the neighborhood against me, but this time I come prepared. The next morning there was a letter on my doorstep. Not a handwritten note or a polite apology. A formal envelope with the HOA letterhead printed in sharp black ink. Inside was a citation. Apparently, I had violated Community Rule 3.17 subsection B regarding disruptive conduct. There was no detail, no description of what I had supposedly done. Just a warning. A fine if it happened again. And a signature at the bottom from the HOA. I almost laughed, except it wasn't funny anymore. She had called the cops on me over groceries. Now she was using her HOA power to make it official. It wasn't enough that I had proven her wrong in front of 2 officers. She needed to double down, to retaliate, to punish me for embarrassing her. So I called the HOA number listed on the letter. It went straight to voicemail. Next, I got an auto reply saying my message had been received and would be reviewed within 10 business days. 10 days. I decided to go in person. The HOA office was a converted room in the clubhouse, the kind of space usually used for birthday parties and fitness classes. When I arrived, Karen was already there, sitting behind a folding table with a binder in front of her, like she was preparing for a courtroom drama. I didn't sit. I didn't smile. I calmly asked her to explain the citation. She looked up and gave me that same expression from Sunday. Flat. Cold. As if I were a stray dog that wandered into her perfectly trimmed yard. "We received complaints," she said. "You caused a scene. Police were involved." "Because you called them," I replied. She shook her head. "You've been hostile since you moved in. This is just the latest example. Your tone, your behavior, people feel unsafe." "Unsafe from what?" I asked. "My almond milk?" She ignored that, said she had filed a report with the HOA grievance committee and that further incidents would be escalated. I asked her directly whether she was the one who filed the complaint. "I don't have to answer that," she said. I took a breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had lived in this community for 3 years, paid dues, shoveled snow for elderly neighbors, hosted a block cookout the year before. I wasn't some newcomer trying to cause trouble. I belonged here. But Karen didn't care. She didn't care about truth or fairness. She cared about control. So I left, and I started documenting everything. I printed out emails, took screenshots of text threads, pulled archived footage from my home security cameras. I even installed a second camera to catch the street view, in case she tried anything else, because something told me she wasn't finished. 2 days later, a neighbor approached me as I was pulling weeds by the driveway. Her name was Evelyn. We'd chatted before, nothing more than friendly waves and comments about the weather. But that day, she looked nervous. "I don't want to get in the middle of anything," she said, "but I thought you should know Karen's been going door to door, telling people you're unstable, that you yelled at her, that the police came to your house because you were threatening." My jaw clenched. I asked Evelyn if she believed her. She looked me in the eye and said no. I've lived here 10 years. I know the difference between troublemakers and the people Karen targets. She wasn't the only one. Over the next week, I got quiet nods, friendly smiles, and comments from other neighbors. One man, a retired veteran, offered to give a character statement if things ever went legal. They'd all seen Karen in action before. Most had stayed quiet, afraid of getting fined, afraid of being the next target. That's when I decided to go further. I started researching HOA policy, pulled every public rule book and clause I could find, made a binder. I called a property attorney and asked about my rights. I asked about what constituted harassment and what could be done when an HOA president. The lawyer didn't hesitate. Document everything, he said. Build your case. And when you're ready, challenge her position. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was angry. And I was tired of being polite while someone lied with confidence just because she had access to a letterhead. Karen might have been used to getting her way, but I was done playing nice. Next up, I take my evidence to the board and expose Karen's lies in front of the people she thought she controlled. She's about to learn that HOA doesn't mean untouchable. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was more than ready. I had a folder the thickness of a phone book. Inside were receipts, emails, written testimonies, printed footage stills, and a copy of the actual police report from the grocery incident. It clearly stated there was no theft and that the complainant had provided no evidence. That part was underlined in blue pen. The meeting was held at the community center. Usually those meetings are half empty and overrun with dry discussions about parking spots and tree trimming budgets. But that night, the place was packed. Karen sat at the head of the fold-out table, a gavel in front of her that she had bought for herself. She banged it once for order and smiled like a queen opening court. "We'll begin with resident feedback," she said. I stood up before anyone else could move. "My name is Marcus. I've lived here for 3 years, and I've been targeted by Karen for the last 6 months, culminating in a false police report accusing me of stealing my own groceries. I'd like to address that tonight." Karen opened her mouth. "I'm speaking," I said. A few people chuckled. A few others leaned forward. I laid the folder on the table and started going through it. I showed the police report. I showed the doorbell footage. I read the HOA citation and explained how it had no basis and violated HOA transparency policy. Then I read off a list of other incidents neighbors had submitted to me privately. Not all wanted their names shared, but the patterns were clear. Unlawful citations, personal vendettas, unrecorded complaints. Karen started to interrupt. She said I was misrepresenting facts. So I turned to her and said calmly, "Karen, did you or did you not accuse me of stealing groceries?" She flushed. "I acted in good faith. That's not what I asked. Did you accuse me?" She shifted in her seat. "Yes, but, and did the police confirm those groceries were mine?" She didn't answer. "Did they arrest me?" "No." "Did they cite me?" I turned back to the board. "Then I'd like to formally submit a motion of censure against Karen for abuse of position and falsification of HOA enforcement." People started murmuring. Some nodded, others looked stunned. Karen banged her gavel again. "This is out of order." "No," I said. "What's out of order is using your position to target residents you don't like and hiding behind HOA rules while you do it." One of the board members, a soft-spoken man named Raj, cleared his throat. "Thorin, I think we should take this seriously." Karen glared at him. "You can't be serious." Another board member, Lisa, chimed in. "We've had complaints, Karen. not just Marcus. You've issued more citations this quarter than the past 3 combined, and none of them have proper records." Karen's voice raised. "That's because people here don't follow rules. I am protecting this community." Lisa frowned. "Are you? Or are you just protecting your own comfort?" The room went quiet. Karen pushed back her chair and stood. "You don't have to take this. I've volunteered for this board for 7 years. This is character assassination." Someone from the back of the room called out, "No, Karen, it's accountability." And just like that, the tide shifted. A motion was raised to hold an internal review. A vote followed. Majority in favor. Karen was suspended from her duties pending the outcome. She stormed out without another word. I gathered my folder and sat back down. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from relief. Not because I had won, but because someone like her had finally been stopped. What amazed me most was what happened after. People came up and shook my hand. Some apologized for staying silent. Others shared their own Karen stories. One woman hugged me and whispered, "We've been waiting for someone to stand up." I realized then that Karen had been in power not because she was right, but because no one had challenged her. Until now. Next up, Karen fights back in the only way she knows how, with more lies and a dramatic accusation that forces me to take things one step further. Karen did what Karens do best. She didn't back down. Within a day of being suspended, she posted a lengthy message in the neighborhood Facebook group. It started with, "I never imagined I'd be persecuted in my own community," and ended with, "Some people will stop at nothing to destroy good leadership." In between, she threw in claims that I doctored footage, manipulated the board, and waged a personal vendetta against her out of jealousy. Jealousy of her clipboard and folding chair. But the post did its job. It stirred up a handful of her loyalists, people who had always believed every HOA warning, who thought lawn height and garage paint shade were indicators of moral character. A few of them began whispering at the mailbox, sending passive-aggressive emails to the board, asking why Marcus was allowed to grandstand without consequence. I didn't respond. I let the facts breathe. And while they fumed, the board kept investigating. They brought in a third-party mediator. They reviewed records. They pulled every complaint Karen had filed in the past year. Turns out, more than half had no supporting documentation. And worse, several were in direct violation of the HOA's own bylaws. She had issued citations without board consent, had fined residents for infractions that didn't exist, had altered timestamps on forms. One citation was filed against a neighbor for excessive driveway noise during a time when the neighbor was out of town. It was a pattern, not just of overreach, but of deliberate targeting. The mediator's report confirmed it. Karen had abused her position. At the next board meeting, the room was even fuller than before. People brought chairs from the lobby. Karen was there too, seated at the end of the table, with a tight smile that never touched her eyes. The board chair stood up and read the findings aloud, calmly, clearly. No drama, just the facts. Karen had violated at least 6 articles of the HOA charter. Her suspension would become permanent. She was banned from holding office within the HOA for 5 years. She would be fined for misuse of funds. And the citation she issued to me was formally rescinded and struck from record. There was no applause, just quiet nods, the kind that come when justice is done not for show, but because it is simply right. Karen didn't speak. She stood, picked up her binder, and walked out. Someone held the door for her. She didn't say thank you, but that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Karen's lawyer. He was accusing me of harassment, of slander, of emotional distress. She wanted an apology, a retraction, damages. It was absurd. My lawyer called it frivolous, a desperate grasp for control. Still, we responded formally. We submitted a counterclaim for defamation and filed a cease and desist. We included the police report, the HOA findings, and screenshots of every public post she had made since the incident. I didn't want a lawsuit, but I wasn't going to be bullied. For weeks, she refused to back down, sent letters, emails, more vague threats. She said I was ruining her life. But here's the thing. I hadn't ruined anything. She had. With every lie, every abuse of power, every time she chose control over community. And now she was living with the consequences. Eventually, her lawyer went silent. The threats stopped. Karen stayed in her house, but she stopped walking the neighborhood. Her clipboard disappeared. So did the glares. She avoided eye contact. She was still there, but only technically, like an unused appliance collecting dust. The HOA, on the other hand, changed completely. They implemented new rules requiring all citations to be reviewed by at least 2 board members. They created a transparency portal so residents could track complaints and responses. They even started hosting community nights again, the kind with potlucks and board games and actual conversations. I was invited to speak at the first one. I declined, not because I didn't care, but because I had already said everything I needed to say. Some things are better shown than said. Respect, truth, accountability. Next up, with Karen's silence and the neighborhood healing, I reflect on what it means to stand up, not just for yourself, but for the kind of place you want to live in. The final chapter coming next. 3 months later, life in the neighborhood felt different. Not just quieter, but lighter. You could hear it in the way people chatted by their mailboxes, in the way dogs lingered on their walks, in the way kids laughed without glancing over their shoulders for a clipboard and a warning. Karen still lived there, but she might as well have been a ghost. She stopped attending HOA meetings. She stopped walking her usual patrol routes. The only sign she was even around was the occasional sighting of her blinds twitching when someone parked too close to her curb. The fine the HOA issued was upheld, and her appeal was denied. The defamation threat she had tossed at me evaporated without a hearing, and the cease and desist my lawyer filed seemed to be the final nail. No more emails, no more letters, just silence. But this wasn't about silencing her. It never was. It was about making something clear. That you don't get to lie about people and call it leadership. That you don't get to weaponize fear and rules and authority just because no one's had the courage to stop you. That living in a neighborhood doesn't mean you own it. And respect isn't something you enforce with a clipboard. It's something you earn, slowly and genuinely. The community started healing. At the next HOA meeting, there were cupcakes on the table, real ones. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else made little place cards for the board. It felt less like a tribunal and more like what it was always supposed to be. Neighbors talking about shared space, shared concerns, shared responsibility. Evelyn, the neighbor who had first warned me about Karen's smear campaign, stood up and said something that stuck with me. She said, "This isn't just about rules or bylaws. It's about who we want to be when no one's watching. When the power's in our hands. Do we use it to bully or to build?" That hit me hard, as I realized how close I had come to letting someone like Karen drive me away. How easy it would have been to say nothing, to keep my head down, to let her believe that silence meant agreement. But silence is just permission in disguise. So I kept showing up. I waved to people I hadn't met before. I offered to help fix a broken fence panel. I shared my tools when someone needed them. And slowly, that invisible line, the one Karen had drawn around who belonged and who didn't, started to disappear. One morning, I was unloading groceries again. Same store, same reusable bags. And for a second, I froze when I heard footsteps behind me. But this time, it wasn't a cop. It was Raj from the board. He smiled and said, "Need a hand?" I laughed. We carried the bags in together. No sirens, no accusations, just a neighbor helping a neighbor. And that, more than anything, reminded me why I stayed, why I fought. Because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. Everyone deserves a place where they don't have to prove they belong, where groceries are just groceries. And justice doesn't require a megaphone. So if you're dealing with a Karen in your life, the kind who confuses control for leadership and power for worth, I hope you remember this. You're not alone. You're not crazy. And you're not powerless. Stand up, speak out, document everything, and most of all, don't let them shrink your world just because theirs is small. Thanks for listening to my story. If anything here reminded you of your own life, drop a comment, like and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you.